Morning and welcome to the 28th meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. Fulton McGregor MSP is joining us online this morning. The first item on our agenda is to decide whether to take items 4, 5, 6 and 7 in private. Are we agreed? We're all agreed, thanks. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Housing and her officials on the draft Energy Performance of Buildings Scotland Regulations 2025, and these are subject to an affirmative procedure. We're joined by Marion McCallan, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Housing, Ross Loveridge, who is the Head of Heat and Buildings Assessment Unit, Norman MacLeod, who's the Senior Principal Legal Officer, Patrick Mason, who's the Head of Heat in Buildings Assessment, and Jess Nivens, who's the Interim Deputy Director, Heat and Buildings Policy and Regulations at the Scottish Government. I welcome everyone to the meeting this morning. There's no need for you to operate your microphones, and I remind everyone to put their devices on silent. The instrument is laid under the affirmative procedure, which means that the Parliament must approve it before it comes into force. In the following evidence session, the committee will be invited at the next agenda item to consider a motion to approve the instrument. And I remind everyone that Scottish Government officials can speak under this item, but not in the debate that follows. And I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a short opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to everybody. I'm very pleased to join you today to speak to the draft Energy Performance of Buildings Scotland Regulations 2025, which will legislate to reform energy performance certificates. The EPC system forms a long-standing part of Scotland's property market since 2008 and of retained EU law across the UK. However, the Scottish Government has heard concerns from stakeholders like the Climate Change Committee and consumer groups such as Which that EPCs need to change and to be of higher quality. I want them to be accurate, up-to-date, relevant and giving consumers the information that they need on the journey to net zero and to warmer, more energy-efficient homes. We've consulted extensively over the past 4 years on EPC reform. Users have been at the centre of this, helping to design a new EPC that I believe is now fit for purpose, and the design of which I'll be very glad to share with the committee after our session today. The draft regulations that I've introduced, they do 3 things. Firstly, they retain the well-established and understood parts of the existing EPC system, namely the existing trigger points requiring an EPC, the standardised assessment carried out by suitably skilled and accredited assessors, and a public register of certificates. Secondly, they introduce the new reforms that we believe are necessary, a redesigned certificate shaped by user feedback, new ratings in property report to ensure consumers have clear information on current and potential fabric performance, heating systems and costs, a reduced validity period from 10 to 5 years to ensure consumers have more up-to-date information, and strengthened quality assurance for EPC assessors to safeguard consumers. Finally, they protect the property market during the transition by introducing the regulations a year before they come into force and including a further 1 year's transition period. We are supporting the market to adjust to the new regime, and this will be underpinned by a clear communications and engagement campaign. Consumers will also benefit from an interactive interface for a more dynamic EPC and through the HEATSA technical suitability assessment. So that's what today's reform regulations do, Convener, but I should be clear they do not mandate property owners to meet an energy efficiency standard. We have consulted separately on those matters, but decisions have yet to be taken. Rather, by introducing the reformed EPC and the new rating systems as a first step, we're providing a foundation for our wider programme in heat and buildings, giving certainty to all sectors on how we will measure energy performance and any future standards that may be linked to this. And my officials and I will be very glad to discuss it with the committee.
Thanks very much. I'm going to open up the questions around EPC metrics and the assessment methodology. And when you joined us in a previous session, you talked about the UK government's home energy model. And it would be good to understand how work with that, how you were working with them on that and how that's progressing, and how any risk that might arise from a delay from that is mitigated.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, the home energy model is a foundational part of the proposed changes. I suppose there's a few things I would point to. Firstly, that our respective officials, UK and Scottish Ministers' officials, have been working very closely together on all of this, right from inception through to where we are now. We have complemented that with interministerial engagement as well, and most recently I wrote in summer to my counterpart in the UK government, just seeking the assurances that the home energy model would be developed in time to coincide with what we are seeking to do from coming into force from next October. I have no reason to suspect that there will be a delay. I think UK ministers are also publicly committed to the timeline. But just to be absolutely sure about that and acknowledging how important it is for the development of this, we have agreed a memorandum of understanding that should there be any delay emerging at UK government end, that they will give us early sight of this. And we should be able to consider some mitigations then if need be. But as I say, I have no reason at this point to believe that there will be a delay.
Okay, and just in terms of the agreed timeline, the date, what are we looking at?
So Ross will keep me right on this, but it's for go live on 31st of October next year.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, we're working to the same timetable, convener, because the UK government, as the Cabinet Secretary has said, is planning to make similar reforms in England and Wales, and because the EPC assessor market operates across the UK, that's covered by internal market legislation, then we really need to coordinate between the two governments so that assessors can continue to work across the UK as both governments adopt the new home energy model as the basis for the new rating system. The UK government has also consulted on changes to the ratings on a similar vein to what we've done.
Great, thanks very much. Now we're going to move to another theme around reduction in EPC validity time periods, and I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and officials. The Scottish Association of Landlords were in favour of retaining the 10-year period, arguing that increased regulation incurs costs that could then be passed on to tenants. So I'm trying to gather a little bit more understanding in relation to why the government has decided to reduce the validity period from 10 years to 5 years, and in particular what impact this could have on private landlords.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'll give my view on this, and then I'll let my team come in with anything else to add. So I think firstly that the whole thrust of the changes here are to empower consumers to understand more about the buildings that they're either buying or renting. And to do that, we need to have accurate and up-to-date information. So there's a balance to be struck between ensuring that they have that up-to-date and accurate information, but also understanding, as you've put, that they're, the frequency with which they're required does create additional obligations for building owners. So to our mind, the move from 10 to 5 years strikes that balance. Ultimately, we are only asking that a property have one more EPC in a decade, which to me feels like a proportionate way to ensure up-to-date and accurate information. And I know that when the committee was hearing evidence that bodies such as Which and others were clear on that as well. I do understand for the rented sector that there will be, particularly when a landlord of either social or private rented sector has a large portfolio, that we're not just talking about having to make one more certificate available. What I would say is for the social rented sector, we have been considering how to work with them on a procurement framework for the procurement of EPCs over a large number of properties, and we think that could reduce costs by up to 20%, convener. For the PRS, the majority of the private rented sector have one property, but I am aware and conscious that there are some who have more. We have been working with them on guidance for reusing data, for example, when it comes to updating an EPC, and I hope that in all of these ways we can make what I think is a proportionate change all the less burdensome. I'm also interested and open-minded to the idea that once you achieve heat retention rating C, that you could move back to 10 years. But that's something that we'll keep under review.
That's helpful, convener. I don't have any further questions on that. Thank
Thanks very much. Do you happen to have, that's interesting, that, the majority of people have one property, some have more. Do you have the data on that?
Yes, so in my handwritten scribbled notes here, I have that in June 2024, 76% of all registrations were for one property. But what I'll do, convener, is I'll go away and make sure I check the source of that and come back to you.
That would be great. Thanks very much. And I think that's interesting, the idea that once people reach an EPC C rating, that there's a possibility of going back to a 10-year. But I think the point also for me around the 5-year is that technology changes and we are getting better on so many other things that could enhance building fabric and so on. We're going to move on to another topic around quality of assessments, assurance and governance, and I'm going to bring in Evelyn Tweed.
Thanks, convener, and good morning, Cabinet
Morning.
Secretary and officials. Cabinet Secretary, can you outline for the committee the government's plans for the training and availability of assessors to undertake the proposed new assessments? Obviously, when we took evidence, there were some concerns about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So my colleague Ross has already mentioned that the assessment and the pool of assessors is a UK-wide matter. So it's another part of this that we're working closely with UK Government to prepare for. Also the approved organisations who oversee the availability and the training standards, etc., have also been part of groups that officials have engaged with, and perhaps they can say a little bit more about that. I think it's probably worth pointing out that the task isn't materially different. It will still be a case of assessing and inputting data. And of course, the approach to introduction that we've taken of that 1 year from now till we start, and then another transitionary year, should allow for preparedness and readiness to be absolutely where it needs to be. But perhaps I could come to Ross and he could fill you in a little bit more about what officials have
I'm happy to do that,
doing.
Cabinet Secretary, and thank you for the question as well. Yes, I think that the market has been through previous changes. EPCs have been updated over time, and so the assessor market is used to having to deal with changes to the calculation methodology, changes to the modelling and the software that is used. And I think we've had good experience over the past 15 or 16 years at knowing that's feasible and that's doable. I think in terms of the capacity of the market, as the Cabinet Secretary says, we've had the good discussion with the approved organisations. We have around 3,200 registered assessors in Scotland, and looking at the register data of certificates that are lodged, we've had in the last sort of year around 1,300 of those. 1,300 of those assessors have been active, so it suggests that there's capacity in the market to be able to cover any anticipated increase in the number of EPCs. And back in 2008, when EPCs went from a standing start, we went, I think, from around 9,000 certificates being issued in 2008 to over 200,000 being issued in 2008 to 9. So the order of magnitude of that increase when the system first came in is far greater than any of the changes that we would be proposing now. And because the market has been able to address those changes in the past, I think it gives confidence that it should be able to do that again in future.
Do we know anything about when the training might start, given it's not that far away?
I think it already has started.
Yeah, so
to an extent, hasn't it?
yeah, we're already working in the discussion with the organisations about that. There are versions of the home energy model which are now available that the approved organisations and assessor organisations are able to begin to interact with. We published our first version of what's called the wrapper, a very complicated term which Patrick could explain, so that they can understand effectively the coding and the way in which the new home energy model is going to calculate the ratings for properties. We are working with the UK Government in terms of the rollout of the training and how to use those new systems. The register itself is being updated. It's going to have a new cloud calculation way of calculating ratings that works with the home energy model. And certainly the time that we've built into the programme planning for this work would see that training commencing in the first part of next year, so in the sort of winter into spring period, to give time to make sure that the market's ready. Patrick, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's the plan.
No, but just to say, yeah, as the Cabinet Secretary set out, the approach, the role of the assessor won't be significantly different, we don't think. So they'll be doing much the same job, but they will need to be able to explain the results to the building owner, for instance. And as we said, we're working closely with the UK Government, and we're, for instance, meeting one of the largest approved organisations next week to understand, the changes that might need to be made to training.
That's making me
On the auditing and assurance requirements, could you give us a bit of an indication on your plans for updating the auditing and assurance requirements?
Yes, and I think I might, forgive me, Convener, I think I might just come straight to Ross on this, because him and I were just having a conversation about it this morning, and he explained it very, very clearly, and I think that explanation would be helpful for the for the committee.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think we've known for a long time, and indeed I think these matters were raised when the committee was discussing EPCs back in January, that there has been long-standing concerns about the quality of EPCs. We've been very explicit as the Government in our various consultations and our discussions with stakeholders, with consumer bodies, like the Cabinet Secretary's mentioned, like Which, that the quality of EPCs needs to improve. The industry wants to do that. It recognises the need for improvement. Moving to the home energy model will help, because it's a more accurate model, and we should get more accurate ratings as a result of that. But when it comes to assessor skills and training, we've committed and launched with the UK Government a review of all the national occupational standards. So these are the standards that specify what domestic assessors have to do, what non-domestic assessors have to do, to make sure that they're appropriately skilled and qualified. And that's a wide-ranging consultation that's underway at the moment to improve and to update those, so that will improve the quality. And then the second thing that we're really doing in Scotland, which is quite distinctive, is aligning with the changes to the EU directive, which was the original basis for EPCs, to bring in an on-site auditing requirement. So at the moment, 2% of EPCs are audited on a desk basis. We're going to improve that desk-based system through smart auditing, which will more accurately and automatically flag potential errors in the results that have been reported on a certificate. But the on-site audit will take a sample of that, 10% of the sample from the desk-based auditing. So 2% of certificates are subject to a desk-based audit, 10% of those will be subject to an on-site audit. And that's about actually sending someone out to actually check that the certificate is accurate. And so that, we think, will make a significant improvement in terms of driving up quality.
Denmark and Ireland.
Yes, and we're working with the Danish and Irish governments.
Yes, who have a similar system.
Okay, thanks. Can you just say, Ross, a little bit more about the smart auditing? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, Patrick can explain this as well. What we have in that is a system that begins to flag errors. So, for example, if an assessor submitted or lodged multiple certificates that seemed like a very, very high number relative to their capacity to be able to actually undertake physically assessments on the ground, then the system would automatically flag that up, and you would then go in and investigate that. Or if a rating from a property changed very rapidly, so a new certificate was lodged very quickly, you'd want to investigate and say, well, why has that rating changed? What's driving that? Is that, Patrick, is there anything else you would want to add to that?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. So it's essentially risk-based auditing. So it's looking at what's, an unlikely set of circumstances, putting some rules in place around that, and then, flagging those certificates for audit.
Okay, great.
The other side of that, from the auditing process, is of course the enforcement process and local authorities as well. And again, this is something that we're conscious of, and the extent to which local authorities are assisted with and supported to understand their obligations and what's required. And again, this is an area we're working on. We are developing a toolkit with local authorities to understand the obligations that arise on them as enforcement bodies, and to help them to carry that out.
Okay, thanks very much. Alexander, you had some questions in that area. Do you want to pursue
yes,
that a bit more?
If I can, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that insight. I mean, as you've identified, there is a problem at the moment when existing regulations and enforcement seem to be quite low and quite poor in some councils, that they don't seem to manage to achieve that. Now, you've just indicated that for the new process, you're looking to have this toolkit. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But what barriers are there for enforcement? Is it workload, or is it just the assessment time? Or within this toolkit, will you be able to give them more opportunities to develop and expand some of that so that they can look at the enforcement? Because there's very little point having regulations that, if they're not enforced effectively and efficiently, and that councils are not managing to achieve that, because it may well mean that someone who has a property in one area is having to deal with enforcement and someone in another is not. So that there needs to be a much better balance and commonality and a process across the field to make sure that happens.
Yes, I would agree. We don't want a disparity in how the regulations are observed and the approach that local authorities are taking. So the changes that we're making now are an opportune moment to pause and to take the opportunity to review how local authorities are currently operating, and to support them to get to that point of broad shared understanding of both the obligations and what to do about them. And I think there's two main ways that that's being done. Firstly, we're looking at best practice across the UK in local authorities who are managing the process well and seeking to draw upon that, and also taking forward that toolkit that I mentioned, which will ultimately be guidance about how the obligations arise and how to discharge them.
Okay. Thank you, Convener.
We're going to move on to consumer awareness and implementation dates. I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, everyone. It's just to talk, Mary, about the consumer side of this and how the government plans to make sure that consumers embrace this whole process, and also if you might say a little bit about the software interface that will be on offer to assist that process. I've had a wee look at the interface at the moment, and it's a wee bit clunky, I would say, and difficult to navigate. So if you could just talk around that for a wee bit, how we get people to get on board with this and how simple we can make the interface.
Of course, thank you. So this is a really important part of getting this right, because as well as better reflecting some of the actions that we want to see in properties in contemporary Scotland, the other main reason for changes here is to make it more readily understandable and navigable for consumers, to empower them with information. So it's been very important to us that the whole process reflects how easily or otherwise users can interact with it. And I think if you look at even the way that we've come to describe the ratings, they're just more intuitive. So we talk about heat retention rating, we talk about heating systems rating, and then cost of energy rating. And these have all been developed on the basis of feedback from ordinary people trying to navigate the system, and they ought to be intuitive. Likewise, hopefully you will see with the certificate itself that it's been designed to just be more navigable and understandable. And of course, all of that is because we want to empower consumers. I think also, again, I would come back to the 2 points. One, the period that we've very deliberately chosen over which to implement this. Again, a year till we start implementation, and then a year of hybrid, where both old and new systems can be worked. And I would also stress our intention that this will be rolled out with a strong consumer engagement communications plan about it all. But as I say, we should be starting from a better position, given that it's been designed to be navigable. And I wonder, Ross, whether you might say a little bit about maybe the number of users that we have worked with to develop this, but also that interface point, because it's quite technical.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And certainly in terms of the numbers of people who responded to the consultations, we've had over 400 over the past the three consultations that we conducted prior to laying these regulations. And in terms of the user design work, I think we've had about 85 individuals in depth working, iteratively with researchers to actually look at certificates, to understand ratings, to say this is the rating that works best for me, or this makes sense to me, this doesn't make sense, please change this. So, for example, the language of heat retention rating came from the fact that participants didn't understand the term fabric energy efficiency. It didn't mean anything to them, but how well the building retains heat was something that was very clear. And the idea that we would have as well would be to design this more interactive interface where people can actually input real data about their energy tariffs or how many times a week they have a shower or what temperature they like to keep their living room at versus their bedroom. And the home energy model, because it's a more sophisticated system, will allow us to have that user interface that can sit alongside the EPC. So the EPC will have to still be a legal document, it will still need to have legal ratings, but you will be able to have this interactive tool that enables members of the public to say, if I fitted a heat pump to this property, what would be the impact on the rating? If I was to, you know, insulate the property in a different way, what would the impact be on my bills? These sorts of things.
So the software that will drive all of that, will that just be launched or will there be a period of testing it and trialling it and so on? And
yeah, so that would be the intention, Deputy Convener. So we're just commissioning the next phase of work on that to sort of, I think it's a discovery project to work out how the technical interface would work and how we would actually do the software development on the home energy model wrapper, and that will need to involve further user testing as part of that. So that won't suddenly just appear out of nowhere.
And are we seriously going to ask folk how many times a week they have a shower?
And it's probably not the best example to give, so I apologise if that's not appropriate in the committee. But it's the sort of example that's been raised in some of the conversations we've had with people. You know, it obviously reflects hot water demand, you know, in a property, and that will impact on your bills. And different people, depending on the size of the family, will have higher levels of hot water demand than others, even if they're choosing to buy or rent the same property.
Okay.
And it's all of however much or little information people want to provide. It's just about, again, empowering them to do that.
Great. Many thanks. Thank you.
Just on the empowering consumers, what are we hoping for? If we empower consumers, how will we see a change in the world around us?
Well, on the one hand, if I put myself into the position of a prospective tenant, I would like to be able to assess how expensive my bills might be on the basis of the heat retention rating of the property. So it's just empowerment and the ability to operate choice from that side of things. But then equally, of course, it can help to drive behaviour change. And I appreciate the government has a role to play in setting standards to accompany the foundation of the new EPC. But of course, that's a discussion for another time. I'll not open up that just now.
Yeah, okay. I'm just, before I bring in my next question, actually, just because we started to touch on the kind of fabric piece and changing that language, right? Because we in the committees talk a lot about fabric first, but who knows what on earth that means. But just it kind of connected to the EPC and the assessment, is there going to be more flexibility on what an assessor can look at in terms of, so what I understand is that there's a category around glass fibre insulation, for example, and there isn't flexibility around potentially new innovation around hemp insulation, which is something that's happening in Scotland, which is very impressive, and it would be fantastic to support it, but it doesn't seem to be that assessors have that ability to actually acknowledge that that's what's being used, and there's all sorts of implications there in terms of, you know, really good things like hemp and embodied carbon and carbon sequestration and things like that. So I see Ross nodding vigorously, so that's good.
I'll let Patrick come in
Yes.
actually on this point, Convener, because he's leading on this work.
Okay.
It's certainly something we can take into account when we're developing the wrapper and doing more detailed methodology development next year. The different properties of different types of insulation that might not be well reflected at the moment.
That would be great, because I've definitely had people coming who are trying to do retrofit and, you know, wanting to do the best they possibly can, and then it's not recognised. So that's great that you're taking that on board. I'm going to move on with a question around the timetable for implementation, and I just want to get a sense. So you, in your opening statement, Mary, you talked about we're bringing these SSIs in a year before, and then there's a 1-year transition period. So I just want to get a sense if that will give the assessor market and those in the property letting and conveyancing sectors that time to prepare. Have you had that discussion with them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, that's right, Convener. So 31st October 26 would be when we would propose these regulations to go live, and then that would begin a 1-year transition when both types of certificate would be valid for both sales and rents. And I would also add that we have Regulation 25 provides that if all reasonable endeavours have been made to achieve or to obtain a new certificate, but it hasn't been possible, it won't get in the way of the property transaction. So it's just a little bit of flexibility to reflect people's reasonable endeavours. And I think just to come back to the point that Ross was touching on before there about where between 2008 and 2009 we had a substantial peak. I think there was about 194,000 more EPCs required. Because of the transitional arrangements that we have put in place, we're only expecting around 56,500 per annum for those first 2 years. So we've kind of split that peak to make it more manageable. Right. And I think that that's really important for consumers. I think I always have that at the forefront of my mind. How do ordinary people who are just trying to go about their property transaction navigate all of this? But equally, you're quite right, conveyancers and others who work in the property market need time as well. I think this provides it for them. And of course, we're engaged with them on that. Having done conveyancing myself, you are completely on top of developments in the property market, and you're some of the best placed individuals to adapt to and to understand the changes. But nonetheless, we are taking our time to make sure that they have a transition period and that they're engaged on the changes.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And with our kind of final round of questions, I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning.
Morning.
I just wonder if you can maybe set out how these EPC reforms fit into the wider heating buildings plans.
Yes, absolutely. So, concisely, I think these are the foundation of the wider heating buildings plans. The reform to the EPC has been lengthy work, it's been complicated work, and once it's done, it will be the reformed basis on which we seek to drive different standards or which we seek to legislate for changes. But really, the EPCs themselves are pretty neutral on all of that. They'll just reflect the situation as they stand, but they're an up-to-date, a well-resourced and a well-understood basis from which to do all that.
Okay. My next question is coming back to the issue of developing technology and how responsive the new system can be to that. So, yes, does the calculations behind EPC, do they still rely on the SAP process? Or is there an updated process behind them?
There is an updated process, and I'm going to swiftly hand over to the technical experts to speak to that.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Yeah, again, it's a good question. So we have used SAP, the Standard Assessment Procedure, for a very long time to calculate EPCs, and the move to the home energy model will replace that. So in a sense, the home energy model is the next iteration of SAP, but it's just no longer called that, and it's a much more sophisticated model than the one that we've been using until now. Patrick always tells me this, but I think it can perform, is it 1,000 calculations a month or something like that?
Yes, it uses half-hourly simulations of the building rather than monthly simulations, and that means it can take different modern technology into account in a more sophisticated way, essentially.
Yep. One of the frustrations of the old SAP process was that it was fully reserved when there were emerging technologies coming onto the market. Government, when I was having constituents coming to me who were installers, they didn't see it as a responsive system, and so just ask if the Scottish Government has the ability to amend the calculations behind EPC to really be at the forefront of recognising the emerging technologies that are coming onto the market all the time.
I think that would largely be about our wrapper, wouldn't it, Patrick? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, no, absolutely. So we would still share, in the same way that we share SAP at the moment with the UK Government, we would still share what's called HEM core. So that's the core of the home energy model. But we're building our own Scottish EPC wrapper that sits around the HEM core. And that means that we can be more responsive in the Scottish Government to changes that we need to make to the calculation for Scotland.
Okay, thanks. And just lastly and briefly, I know there's been a BRIA done on the process, but just to ask if the Government are anticipating any impact on housing supply at all with these changes?
I think we're very conscious that whenever you make changes like this, it is a fundamental change. But what I take a lot of comfort in is that comparison with 2008-9, whereby, as I said, there was a much more significant jump in EPCs having to be produced than what we would be expecting here, and that we've spread it over 2 years. I would then reflect again on what I said before, which is that the EPC is ultimately a neutral piece of work. It will be regulated standards that come atop it that will be more, you have to watch much more closely for how it changes or impacts the property market.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's been very helpful, and that concludes our questions from members. So we're now going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the formal consideration of motion S6M 19564, that the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee recommends that the Energy Performance of Building Scotland Regulations 2025 draft be approved. And I remind those present that this debate can last up to 90 minutes, and I invite the Minister to speak and to move this motion.
I will move the motion, Convener.
Thank you. Do any members wish to speak? No members wish to speak. And now invite the Cabinet Secretary to wind up and respond to the debate.
Quite expectedly, Convener, I don't have much to add to the debate. I would just ask the committee to approve the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that motion S6M 19564 in the name of Mary McCallan be agreed. Are we all agreed? We're agreed.
Thank you.
Okay, so the committee now, we are now going to produce our report to the Parliament on this draft instrument. Is the committee content to delegate the responsibility to me as convener to agree this report on behalf of the committee? Agreed. We're all agreed. And that concludes this consideration of this instrument. Cabinet Secretary, thank you to you and your officials for your evidence this morning. I think that was very constructive. And I now conclude the public part of the meeting, and we will move into private.